I want to set up the next part of the session, which is the work that you're going to be doing at tables. But in order for us to do that, what I want to do is briefly touch upon the 5 needs of a well-being economy as defined by the membership, a vast membership, a global membership of the Wellbeing Economy Alliance. But these slides that I'll be sharing now, I hope will be very useful for you in the exercise to come. So, firstly, what you're seeing on stage are the 5 we all needs. Okay, starting on the top left, dignity. Everyone has enough to live in comfort, safety, and happiness. Kate touched on this, meeting the needs of all. Okay? Fairness, justice in all its dimensions at the heart of economic systems. Kate there also talked about rebalancing, fairer trade rules, a redistribution of power, a sharing of power in a more equitable fashion. We need a change in the way that the economic system creates, or doesn't at the moment, create fairness. Participation. We can't be passive recipients. We need to be active participants in terms of actually shaping our own future and people feeling emboldened to do so. So although it doesn't sound like a terribly economicsy term, participation is critical if we are to achieve this goal, which is why it's not just going to be about me on stage, Kate on the screen, but you working in this session as well, participating. Purpose. We all need a purpose in life, and so does the economy. The economy, for the economy's sake, is not good enough. It surely must be for the purpose. As Gary mentioned, I think, in the first session, of what is the purpose of the economy. It is surely for improving the well-being of the governments, the citizens of a particular country. That must be the purpose of a government and the economy. But critically, as Kate pointed out multiple times with her references to planetary boundaries, this all needs to be wrapped up within nature. Humans are one with nature, and we give back as much as we take from the earth. We cannot avoid this. And the trouble is, of course, we've now hit planetary boundaries. We've exceeded planetary boundaries, and we need to rein our economic system back within those. So those are the 5 needs, but I'm also going to talk to you about 4 Ps. And the 4 Ps are how we describe sort of a macro array, as we call it. Forget about that term, that's a bit of a fancy one. But basically, how we get to a well-being economy. How do the policies need to be structured in order for us to achieve those 5 needs? And the first one of these, and the one I love the most personally, is pre-distribution. Why is it that so much wealth, so much power gets concentrated in the hands of so few, and then it's on governments to redistribute via taxes? Why are we not baking into the system that we share the value as it's created in the first place? And some examples, as noted up there, employee-owned businesses, community wealth building, living wages. This way we are ensuring that the value is pre-distributed. It doesn't require to be redistributed. Secondly, purpose. So I mentioned shifting the purpose of, what is the purpose of the economy? At the moment, we're fixated and focused exclusively on GDP. That's not a means to end, that's not an end in and of itself. We need to look beyond GDP. We need to look at visionary national development plans. Prevention. Health was a key focus of this first session. And I find it, extraordinary that in health sectors, and I come from a country in the UK where we established the National Health Service now 75 years ago, is it? Something like, no, 70 years ago, I think. And the disease burden has completely transformed since the time that our health system was established, but our health system hasn't changed in order to meet the growing burdens, many of which are preventable diseases. They are lifestyle issues, but we don't have that focus on prevention. It just makes common sense. Stop it before the problem starts. And then finally, people-powered. So back to that participation point. And the example I give, citizens' assemblies, participatory budgets, these are just generally well known, but there are many other examples of having people involved. Okay? Which one? Pre-distribution? Yeah. There we go. So pre-distribute power, wealth, time and income social enterprises, businesses owned by their workers, community wealth building and living wage. So, going to move on in a second to the exercise, because as I mentioned at the beginning of this session, many people find the economy an incredibly difficult sort of idea to describe, if you like. So I hope we helped with that first description to sort of demystify that. An economy is the way we produce and provide for one another. Okay, simple as that. But that won't mean that you all won't find it difficult to describe what it means in terms of how we live or where we live, our jobs, our health, our communities. How do they connect with a well-being economy? So this is why we're going to do an exercise. We're going to work with others at your tables to practice this, to how to frame the problem and the solution and critically do something about it. Okay? So on your tables, you're going to have, you've got sheets of paper, and we're going to be asking you to activate a shared value, explain the problem and the solution, and end with a call to action. But before we do that, I'm going to give you just an example, okay, to hopefully sort of make it a little bit easier to think about how to do this. Okay, so I'm going to take the value of nature. So remember there were 5 needs that I articulated before, okay? So, value of nature. Humans are one with nature, and we give back as much as we take from the earth. Okay, so these graphs show how emissions are at record highs right now, and that they are tied to economic growth. Yes, there's a dip in the graph on the right-hand side. That was simply COVID. But once we passed through COVID, up went the emissions again as GDP growth came back. Okay, these two things are still linked. The economy is driving the climate crisis. What impact is that having? Well, we're seeing wildlife populations plummet by 70%. Just think about that. You just got, say, 10 wild animals back in 1970. There's only 3 of them left. That's an incredible, that is a collapse, okay? And we can't get around that. And the trouble is, GDP doesn't take into account any of this. You could have an oil spill, and it might actually be good for GDP, or a hurricane because of the costs of the cleanup. So by organizing our economy around GDP growth and making policy decisions based on GDP, we end up setting the wrong priorities. Even this chap, Simon Kuznets, the creator of GDP, warned about its limited ability to measure progress. He was cautious about its use as a measure of economic health. He warned the US Congress at the time not to be so narrowly focused on it, and yet here we are, 70 years later, 80 years later, fixated on this figure. And I can say that from a country with a centre-left government whose mantra is growth, growth, growth. No conversation about the quality of the growth, just growth. Kuznets emphasised that a true measure of national welfare should consider the quality of the growth, not just its quantity, to provide a comprehensive understanding of economic progress. But he was at a time where we hadn't hit planetary limits. We've now hit and exceeded planetary limits. So we need to go beyond even the concept of the quality of growth. We need to be thinking beyond growth. Okay, so this is the framing of the problem. And just to really hammer this point, it's like going to the doctor and just getting one thing checked and disregarding everything else. No, doctor, I'd just like to get my GDP checked. Don't tell me about inequality. Certainly don't trouble me with planetary boundaries. Just give me the GDP, please. Why are we looking at one metric when we need to be considering other things when we're thinking about society and the planet? Okay, so that's the problem part. And here's an example of a solution. So in Wales, 10 years ago, this year, they created the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act. This is a groundbreaking piece of legislation that aims to improve the social, environmental, cultural well-being of Wales. You can see on the screen there 7 different dimensions. These came out of a huge public consultation in Wales where people were asked, what matters to you? What is the Wales we want? And these were the components. That's a much richer story than just saying, we'd like GDP, please. Okay? And critically, this requires all statutory bodies to think long-term, to collaborate, to consider the long-term future generations' impact of their actions in the short term, which is a very challenging thing to do, particularly in democratic societies where there is a continuous political cycle and change in elections, okay? And they set up a future generations commissioner and team to hold the government of the day's feet to the fire, hold them to account for doing this. So a real solution to try and think long term and think beyond. What did this actually mean in practice? Well, one great example is that they completely inverted their transport budget from being focused on new road building to a focus on public transport and active transport. So building cycle lanes, investing in bus services, train services, rather than simply extending motorways and building new roads, okay? Okay, so that's an example of a solution. And on your tables, you've got, as I mentioned, a piece of paper which has what you're seeing on screen, but blank, okay? So in summary, and that's what you're going to be filling in. But just to go through that example, as I've just described it, we all want to enjoy a safe and thriving natural world, okay? So that's the value of nature. Our problem, but our natural world is cracking at the seams. Global wildlife populations have plummeted, and we're running out of time to stop climate change. The economic model we've inherited doesn't factor in the natural limits of the Earth. So what was the solution? We can redesign our economy, prioritize the well-being of people and planet, look at the Wales Future Generations Act. And what might be a call to action? Because I don't want this simply just to be a talking shop. We want to be thinking about what can we actually do when we leave the conference centre. And here we're suggesting join with others to support or start a campaign for such legislation in your country. There are such campaigns in a number of countries around the world inspired by that legislation in Wales, okay? Now I've given an example which is quite a high bar, I think, but I think we need to maintain that high bar. So don't worry in your tables about necessarily the cost or how we'll implement it. Shoot high with the vision in terms of the solution that you'll be discussing, okay? So now it's going to be over to you. So just a reminder, as I said, you have these sheets. We're going to ask you to activate a shared value, explain the problem and the solution, and then end with a call to action, okay? Now, these are some of the topics that you're going to be listening to and hopefully getting a chance to participate in throughout the remainder of the session. There's going to be sessions on business, cities, health, communities. I want you and your table to decide one topic to focus on for this exercise, okay? So just focus on one area or aspect of life that you want to understand how that can connect with a well-being economy. And I'm going to leave this slide up because this has the 5 needs, the kind of values that we need to achieve for a well-being economy. It's got the 4 Ps and it's got a reminder of the task at hand. Now, it's 1:45, so I'm going to say let's take 20 minutes. Scattered across the room, there are representatives from the Youth Advisory Group for the forum. They're going to be help facilitating the conversations at your table. They're not going to be giving you the answers. They're going to be helping to facilitate that conversation. And in about 20 minutes, I'm going to ask a few keynote listeners, because it's not keynote speakers, important people talking to you, it's going to be people listening to you, to come up on stage, and I'll ask some of those youth advisory representatives to just give short summaries of the conversations they've been noting down at their tables so that those on the panel can give their reflections on your thoughts. Okay? So I'm hesitant to say, is there any questions? Because that may take most of the remaining time. But I tell you what, I'll also be walking around, so if there are any questions, put your hand up. But we're going to take 20 minutes now, okay? I will give you a 10-minute heads up, a 5-minute heads up, and a 1-minute heads up, so we don't all go, oh dear, we've only just decided on the value, we've not completed the rest of the exercise. So over to you.